Morning, Owls. Luna's come to say hello first before she starts to ruin the video, like normal. Say hello, Luna. Say hello. I think she wants to go. Are you staying? Nope, she's off. She's attacking my hand. Chapter 31. Stanley angrily dug his shovel into the dirt. He was angry at everyone. Mr. Verdansky, the warden, Zigzag, X-Ray, and his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. But most of all, he was angry at himself. He knew he should never have let Zero dig part of his hole for him. He still could have taught him to read. If Zero could dig all day and still have the strength to learn, then he should have been able to dig all day and still have the strength to teach. What he should do, he thought, was go after Zero. But he didn't. None of the others helped him dig Zero's hole, and he didn't expect them to. Zero had been helping him dig his hole, now he had to dig Zero's. He remained out on the lake digging during the hottest part of the day, long after everyone else had gone in. He kept an eye out for Zero, but Zero didn't come back. It would have been easy to go out after Zero. There was nobody to stop him. He kept thinking, that's what you should do. Maybe he could climb to the top of the big thumb. If it wasn't too far away, and it was really the same place where his great-grandfather had found refuge, and if, after 100 years or so, water was still there. It didn't seem likely. Not when an entire lake had gone dry. And even if they did find refuge on the big thumb, he thought, they'd still have to come back here, eventually. Then they both had to face the warden and her rattlesnake fingers. Instead, he came up with a better idea. Although he didn't have it quite figured out yet, he thought that maybe he could make a deal with the warden. He would tell her where he really found the gold tube, if she wouldn't scratch Zero. He wasn't sure how he'd make the deal without getting himself in deeper trouble. She might just say, tell me where you found it, or I'll scratch you too. Plus, it would mean X-Ray would get into trouble. She'd probably scratch him up as well. X-Ray would be out to get him for the next 16 months. He dug his shovel into the dirt. But the next morning, Zero still hadn't returned. Stanley saw one of the counsellors sitting guard by the water spigot outside the shower wall. Mr. Verdansky had 2 black eyes and a bandage over his nose. I always knew he was stupid, Stanley heard him say. Stanley was required to dig only one hole the next day. As he dug, he constantly watched out for Zero, but never saw him. Once again he considered going out onto the lake to look for him, but he began to realise that it was already too late. His only hope was that Zero had found God's thumb on his own. It was impossible. His great-grandfather had found it. For some reason, his great-grandfather had felt the urge to climb up to the top of the mountain. Maybe Zero would feel the same urge. If it was the same mountain. If water was still there. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't impossible. There had been a storm just a few days ago. Maybe Big Thumb was actually kind of a natural water tower and caught and stored all the rain. It wasn't impossible. He returned to the tent to find the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Verdansky all waiting for him. Have you seen Zero? The warden asked him. No. No sign of him at all. No. Do you have any idea where he went? No. You know you're not doing him any favours if you're lying, said Mr. Sir. He can't survive out there for more than a day or two. I don't know where he is. All 3 stared at Stanley as if he was trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Mr. Verdansky's face was so swollen he could barely open his eyes. They were just little slits. You sure he had no family? The warden asked Mr. Verdansky. He's a ward of the state, Mr. Verdansky told her. He was living on the streets when he was arrested. Is there anyone who might ask questions? Some social worker who took an interest into him? He has nobody, said Mr. Verdansky. He was nobody. The warden thought for a moment. Okay. I want you to destroy all of his records. Mr. Verdansky nodded. He was never here, said the warden. Mr. Sir nodded. Can you get into the state files from your computer? She asked Mr. Verdansky. I don't want anyone in the AGs in the office to know he was here. I don't think I can erase him completely from the state file, said Mr. Verdansky. Too many cross references. But I can make sure it would be very difficult for anyone to ever find a record of him. Like I said, though, no one will ever look. No one really cares about Hector Zeroni. Good, said the warden. There you go, that is chapter 31. We are going to read chapter 32 as well. They're short chapters today, but let's keep going. 2 days later, a new kid was assigned to Camp Green Lake in Group D. His name was Brian, but X-Ray called him Twitch because he was always fidgeting. Twitch was assigned Zero's bed and Zero's crate. Vacancies didn't last long at Camp Green Lake. Twitch had been arrested for stealing a car. He claimed he could break into a car, disconnect the alarm, and hotwire the engine all in less than a minute. I never planned to, steal one, he told them. But sometimes, I walk past them in a real nice car parked in a deserted area, and, I just want to start twitching. If you think I twitch now, you should see me when I'm around a car. The next thing I know, I'm behind the wheel. Stanley lay on his scratchy sheets. It occurred to him that his cot no longer smelled bad. He wondered if the smell had gone away, or he just got used to it. "Hey, caveman," said Twitch. "Do we really have to get up at 4:30? "You get used to it," Stanley told him. "It's the coolest part of the day." He tried not to think about Zero. It was too late. Either he'd made it to Big Thumb, or... What worried him the most, however, was that it wasn't too late. What worried him the most was what really ate his insides was the fear that it wasn't too late. What if Zero was still alive, desperately crawling across the dirt, searching for water? He tried to force the image out of his mind. The next morning, out on the lake, Stanley listened as Mr. Sir told Twitch the requirements for his hull. "As wide and as deep as your shovel." Twitch fidgeted. His fingers drummed against the wood shaft on his shovel, and his neck moved from side to side. "You wouldn't be twitching so much after digging all day," Mr. Terse told him. "You won't have the strength to wiggle your pinky." He popped some sunflowers into his mouth, deftly chewed them, and spat them. "This isn't a Girl Scout camp." The water truck came shortly after sunrise. Stanley got in line behind Magnet ahead of Twitch. What if it's not too late? He watched Mr. Serfield's X-rays canteen. The image of Zero crawling across the hot, dyed dirt remained in his head. But what could he do even if Zero was somehow alive after more than 4 days? How would Stanley even find him? It would take him days. He'd need a car. Or a pickup truck. A pickup truck with a tank of water on the back. Stanley wondered if Mr. Sir had left the keys in the ignition. He slowly backed away from the line, then circled back to the side of the truck. He looked through the window. The keys were there, dangling in the ignition. Stanley felt his fingers start to twitch. He took a deep breath, ready to steady himself, and tried to think clearly. He'd never driven before. But how hard could it be? This is really crazy, he told himself. Whatever he did, he knew he had to do it as quickly before Mr. Sir noticed. It's too late, he told himself. Zero couldn't have survived. But what if it wasn't too late? He took another deep breath. Think about this, he told himself. But there wasn't time to think. He flung open the door to the truck and climbed quickly inside. "Hey!" shouted Mr. Sir. He turned the key and stepped on the gas pedal. The engine revved. The truck didn't move. He pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine roared. The truck was motionless. Mr. Sir came running around the side of the truck. The door was still open. "Put it in gear!" shouted Twitch. The gear shift was on the floor. Next to the seat, Stanley pulled the lever back until the arrow pointed to the letter D for drive. The truck lurched forward. Stanley jerked back against the seat and tightly gripped the wheel as the truck accelerated. His foot was pressed to the floor. The truck went faster and faster across the dry lake. It bounced off dirt piles, and suddenly Stanley was slammed forward, then instantly backwards as the airbag exploded in his face. He fell out of the open door and onto the ground. He'd driven straight into a hole. He lay on the dirt, staring at the truck, while stuck lopsided on the ground. He sighed. He couldn't blame his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather for this. This time, it was his own fault. 100%. He had probably just done the stupidest thing he had ever done in his short and miserable life. He managed to get to his feet. He was sore, but he didn't think he had broken any bones. He glanced back at Mr. Sir, who who remained where he was, staring at Stanley. He ran. His canteen was strapped around his neck. It banged against his chest as he ran. Every time it hit him against, it reminded him it was empty, empty, empty. There's another 2 chapters done for the day. Tune back in for tomorrow. I'm posting this on the YouTube channel for the first time, so hit a like, whatever you have to do. I'll see you later, guys.